As soon as I started talking about pet grief, you would be absolutely shocked, maybe not, because you might have this, of how many people said, I still mourn my cat who died 3 years ago. I never had a chance to really mourn my dog because life was just too busy.
Welcome to the Story of Spirit podcast, where practical spirituality meets real life. Hi, I'm your host, Sheetal Story. I'm a psychic medium, grief support counselor, professional astrologer, and a human design reader, and of course, a law of attraction master coach. With my unique blend of spiritual and practical tools, I am here to help you align with your soul-led purpose and ignite a life that sets your soul on fire. In this podcast, we are going to explore the principles of energy, astrology, spirituality, and psychology to help you heal your grief and create an aligned life and business from the inside out. Whether you are looking to deepen your intuition, understand your cosmic design, or transform your business, this podcast is for you. Join me each week for insightful discussions, practical tips, and inspiring stories that will guide you on your journey to living your very best life. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Sheetal Story or wherever you listen to this podcast. Let's dive in and start this transformative journey together. Welcome to the Story of Spirit podcast.
Today, I want to talk about a topic that is very prevalent in my community. And I know if you are listening to this, it will catch you at the right and perfect moment. And it is about pet loss. It is so hard if you have a pet and they are in your heart. They're with you through really every single moment that you are at home or with them. And they're so unconditionally loving. So pets are actually healing spirits that have been put onto this planet to help us heal. They are glimmers in the darkness, in the times of our lives that we are struggling. And even in times that we're not struggling, they are with us. You know, those prints of them are in every memory. And as they grow and as we, allow them to be who they are and also try to nurture them into, a pet that we can live with, there is also such a personality that comes out in every pet. I say I'm a soul person. I'm not necessarily a pet person because there are certain souls that you really just jive with, and there's certain souls that you're not. And I believe that pets come into your life, they choose you, they know that they're going to be intersecting with your life at a point where you're going to need them the most. And they really do hear your heart. You know, when you're crying or when you're upset, they will come and sit on your lap or they will be with you. They diffuse your energy and they can really take in your energy of pain and grief. So they are sponges, they really are such caring, beings. I've met some cats that have some really interesting personality traits, but when push comes to shove, they will come about when you're crying or when you're sad and they'll sit on your lap. And they're, they operate on their own terms, whereas dogs are a little bit more, unconditionally loving, although there are many cats that are like that too. And this isn't just, pets, dogs, and cats that pass away that touch our heart. Birds are so smart, and they really do have their own personality, as do reptiles and fishes and any pets at all. We give them such love and they receive. They do hear us too, even when we're talking to them. So pets really occupy a place in our lives that are closer than family, so much closer than family. And there's such unconditional love that comes from them and us. They really are, we don't really expect a whole lot from our pets, and we take care of them, we'll feed them, we take them to the vet. They really are like another child in our lives. And when they're sick, we really care about them. Lives will alter to take a pet to a vet. And end of life with a pet can be really, really challenging. And it's really challenging because there isn't a lot of understanding, I think, in the world for pet loss. So when your pet passes away, either suddenly or because it was planned, it is still an emptiness that sits in your life, right? You come home and your house feels empty. You think of them a lot. Oh, should I feed them or should I get home? And you're like, oh, they're not there. There is so much loss around them because they're in your life all the time. They occupy so much space in your heart that when they have passed on to spirit, that space feels empty somehow. And it is that emptiness, that loss, that is grief, right? We feel grief with loss. Any perceived loss will have a grief associated with it. And pet loss, there isn't bereavement days for your pet passing away. It's really, really unfortunate because if a pet really occupies so much of your of space in your life, I had a friend whose dog was her number one companion. She never really had a spouse or a significant other. She chose not to have children. It was her career and her dog. And she took her dog on holidays. She took her dog on many excursions. And this dog was literally her life companion. And so when the dog passed away, she was debilitated, absolutely debilitated. And rightfully so. I mean, she lost her biggest companion and pillar in her life. And I understood that. I understood that because I understand grief. And many people in her life did not understand that, make stories about that based on their own experience with grief, which really isn't helpful for anyone, right? Judgment and grief, I think, is fascinating. I shouldn't grieve, or they shouldn't grieve, or we're not allowed to grieve. Well, who says, right? Why are we putting judgment on grief? It is the one time where it's a judgment free zone. Everyone gets to grieve in their own way, and it's not for us to judge that. So with pet loss, especially, I think the world does not really allow for a lot of support in that way. And yet anyone you talk to who has a pet or had a pet is devastated by their loss. And I think we can come to the debate now, whether it's a debate or maybe a talking point of whether you have chosen the time and date in which you are going to put your pet down, as they say. I don't like that term at all. To put your pet down. It's more so to release your pet to the afterlife. Maybe I'm not sure what a proper term would be for that, but if we choose that course of action, it's because you've done so with love, right? Compassion, that your pet is going through something that is either irreversible, not healable, going through a lot of pain, or is nearing their end of life and their quality of life is deteriorated significantly. So we tend to make that choice with so much love and compassion. And yet every person I know who has gone through it holds guilt. Did I wait too long? Should I waited longer? Did I do enough for this pet's life? Could I have made their life better? And even when you go back over this pet's life, the only thing it knew is you. The only thing it knew was your love. That's a beautiful, perfect life. It does not know any different. If it talks to its friend at the dog park, or its cat friend, I don't know where a cat would meet another cat, but if it was an outdoor cat, I suppose it would meet cats everywhere. But that they're not sitting there and kind of going, well, my owner gave me this kind of food, your owner gives you, ooh, that's too bad. Like, they're not comparing. They don't have that kind of ego. They are living in the moment, right? Which is a beautiful invitation for us to live in the moment as well. And so when we make that choice for when your pet will cross, there is often a feeling in your heart of deep sadness or guilt or shame. We should have done more. We didn't know this was going to be their end. Or you may have waited longer than you needed to because you really held on to them, or you weren't sure if you waited long enough because you're like, is this really bad enough? So I always encourage people to make this choice with their veterinarian, because the vet will know, if this is curable, what's happening with the pet. Are they in any pain? How much medication can you give a pet before you finally say, okay, this is enough. This poor pet needs to be at peace, needs to be at rest. So it's always made with a compassionate knowing or compassionate heart. Maybe not always a knowing, because sometimes we resist that knowing because we love our pets so much and we don't want them to go. And one thing I will say, though, is when they are taking their last breath, if your vet allows you to be with them. It really means so much to pets. I have channeled a number of pets. I'm not a pet psychic, but I have had many pets come through in readings in the past, and they are always so appreciative that they get to take a breath, their last breath, with their owner holding them, because you are their safety, you are their comfort zone. And I would say, if you're thinking about getting a pet or have a pet and you don't think you're going to be strong enough to be there with them when they take their last breath, then perhaps you could just be there when the vet puts them to sleep. But for them to be stressed and dropping them off because you can't handle that, then you need to look within to see what is that then, because this pet has been your companion your whole life, right? It's been with you all of this time, and it needs you in these moments now more than ever. So it is time to step up and be there for them. I'm going to say that as a voice for the pets, because it's a hard time, right? That they know something is wrong, they know something is different, and they're not a fan of your vet. No matter how wonderful your vet is, this is about you being there for your pet. So if this feels like shaming you, or you made a different choice down, in the past, then I encourage you to just forgive yourself for that, because it's not my intention to shame you. It is, I really couldn't care less about what your decision was, but I can just tell you from your pet's point of view, they want you there. They really, you give them comfort and you give them solace. They know everything is going to be okay when you're there. And it's important as a pet owner to be present with your pet at the time of their passing, if it is a choice that you have to make, right? It is so important to them for that. So I hope, if you haven't made that choice yet, or you're thinking of making the choice, and you can hear me, it is so difficult to say goodbye. And it's also difficult for your pet. So, something to really think about, that being there and holding them during that moment in time. There are also some vets that will not let you be in the room as they take their last breath, but they will let you be in the room when they put them to sleep. So, often vets will ask you that choice, do you want to be there with them or not? That is, of course, your choice. You have free will, but I'm just going to invite that they will really, really appreciate and step into spirit with much more ease if you are there with them, especially when they go to sleep. You don't have to be there when they take their last breath. Usually it's two different injections. One is the first one to put them to sleep, and then the next one stops their heart. So if that's a choice you had to make, I'm just sending so much love to you, because it's not easy. It's not. Because it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And I don't think anyone gets a pet thinking that they're going to one day have to say goodbye to their pet, because some pets can live a very long time. And it is a reality of owning a pet, just as is keeping them healthy and taking them for walks and looking after them, as is also walking them into spirit. That is part of your job as having a pet. Now, when they cross into spirit, it is very peaceful. We have sort of this understanding over the Rainbow Bridge, which is actually a really wonderful book to help those of you who are navigating pet loss. And pets, again, like, it can be horses, it can be lizards, it can be fish. I mean, no one gets to tell you how important your pet is to you. No one gets to tell you how much you should grieve with regards to your pet. Like, if you loved your lizard and the lizard was like a big part of your life, and you mourn the loss of your lizard, that's okay. You get to do that. I know people who love their snakes, and they collect snakes, and they take care of their snakes with such deep reverence for them that, if your snake were to die, you'd be really upset by that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So highly, if there's any judgment there, or you're feeling like, oh, a snake really over a dog? Yeah, snake over a dog. It's important. You don't get to choose which is more important, right? Loss is subjective to the person who's going through it. So the book is that I highly recommend to anyone who is going through grief and loss is The Rainbow Bridge by Adrian Reiside. Adrian, and Reiside is spelled Raeside. And we'll put a link in the show notes for the book on Amazon. But if you're in any other place in the world, you can just look up the book and buy it quite easily. And it is a beautiful book explaining how pets cross, what happens to them on the other side, is sort of a pet paradise, if you will. It's really beautiful. And it helps a young boy who's moving through loss of his dog. And it's a really heartwarming story that I actually recommend for reading to all of my intuition students because it just helps you to understand pet grief in a different way. And it's really a beautiful book to do that. Now, there are 5 ways to move through pet grief that I recommend to my clients. I have much more than 5 because I have helped many clients who have been grieving the loss of their pets. And yes, grief counseling for pet loss is a thing. It's actually a really powerful thing because it helps you to really incorporate your grief and move forward with peace. I had a client who was going through loss, anticipatory loss. So somebody was going through not amnesia, sorry, the word is dementia. And as there's her family members are going through it, she was really grieving in a way that just felt not really quite proportionate to me. So whenever we have disproportionate grief or reactions to situations, it really means that there's something underneath that is still feeding that grief that has not been healed yet. So when we started to peel away the layers, she actually had a pet that had not been grieved properly. She just had to gloss over it because the requirements from her life were so loud that they needed her in those moments, family, work, everything. She didn't have time to grieve this pet. She literally had to hop on a plane and go and do other things. So there was no time. And she just glossed over it. And one of the things I say often, if you follow me on social media, is grief will wait for you. Grief will wait for you. If you do not handle your grief in that moment, it will sit there. It'll sit there. It'll wait there for you. And then at the least opportune time, it will come to the surface and you will start to cry. In the grocery store, at a boardroom meeting, on the plane, something will jar it kind of free from its prison that you have put it in. It will rise to the surface and it will make you cry. So I always say then deal with the grief in the moments that you can versus trying to push it aside and not deal with it. Because again, unhealed grief will prevent you from moving ahead in your life. It will stop you in your tracks. So instead of doing that, let's move the grief in those moments that you're feeling in. So I like to move the energy of grief, right? Grief goes through some predictable cycles, which I've talked about in a previous podcast. And it's not linear, right? You can kind of move back and forth from anger to sadness to acceptance to sadness to anger. Normally, when we've processed anger and grief, it normally doesn't tend to come back because we've truly processed it. But I like to move the energy of grief and give it an outlet, right? I've heard the term, and you probably have as well, grief is love with nowhere to go, right? When we love something so much and they're gone, where do you put that love, right? It feels like you don't know where to put it anymore. So let's give it an avenue. Let's move that grief into something else. So, 5 ways to move the grief of pet loss. The first one is to create a sacred space in your home for a pet. So if you, let's say, I've seen this quite often on mantles of fireplace mantles, there'll be a collar for their pet. They might have a candle there to be lit. Maybe they have the pet's ashes there. I have a client who got the dog's fur and put it in a bracelet that she wears, or even put it into a little Ziploc bag, and she carries that Ziploc bag with her when she goes on walks. So it feels like she's taking her dog with her on the walks with her. So, sacred space in your home, you might have a picture of your pet there, a candle that you might want to light, just an area of the house where your pet just occupies. And it could even be your dog's bed that he had before, he or she had before. But it tends to, especially if you're moving and you're downsizing, that might be kind of too big. So, just a little wonderful altar space, whatever feels right for you. It doesn't have to be something big, just a picture, a candle, their collar. You didn't have a collar, maybe something else that reminds you of your pet, to just have that little sacred space for them, and someplace where you can just go and touch their picture and just, think about them, right? It's a really great place to just, and every time you miss your pet, you can just light the candle, of course, with safety and making sure it's, doesn't burn out or doesn't cause any harm to your home. So always burning candles with care. I do have a client who actually has one of those battery operated candles because it looks really nice in the night and she doesn't have to worry about it burning out or hurting anything or being unattended, right? So that felt fine for her. Another way to move the energy of grief with your pet is to create a PowerPoint or a video for all your pet's lovely memories, right? Normally we have a lot of pictures. Sometimes you'll have videos of your pets. We love taking pictures of our pets, don't we? And so, as you have all those pictures and you look back, you can even crowdsource. I have a friend that just did that, where she asked for all her friends and family to send her any pictures they had of her beloved pet, and she made a PowerPoint presentation. She actually made a video on social media that she shared as a tribute to her pet, which was beautiful. I often encourage my clients to make a PowerPoint, and you see that often at funerals, right, where people are or celebration of life, where they'll have all the pictures of their poignant memories put together in a wonderful kind of video set to music. I encourage you to do the same thing if you're grieving a pet. It's a wonderful way to remember their best moments in their life, and you'll often notice that your age or the time frame of your life changes with those pictures. So you remember really important things that were going on in your life at that time that perhaps your dog was aware of. So maybe it's moving to a new home or taking them on a vacation or a relationship. Like, you'll just notice that your pet will be the steady kind of piece throughout those moments in your life. And that's why we miss them so much, because they're foundational, right? They're this loving force that moves with us as life is changing. They create that safety for us. So the PowerPoint would be a really wonderful reminder of all those wonderful memories and all the milestones that your pet kind of went through with you. From puppy, if you had the dog at puppy stage. I'm using a dog as example because it's sort of the easiest. But if you had a cat or a kitten or a bird or a lizard or anything that you had, you can think about it when you first got it versus at the end of its life, and that all that space in between is filled with wonderful memories. Journaling is the third way to move the energy of grief, really talking about how you're feeling, what you're missing about them. Everything that you are thinking, you can pour it out onto a page. If you're not a writer, there is something about writing it. So, if you're typing it into a computer, it's not the same as moving the energy through a pen and paper and old school journaling it. If you're not a journaler, you can talk it into a phone note. I like to use Otter AI as a phone note transcriber. So you just talk it into the phone, and then it will transcribe it into words, and then you could put that together in a journal if you'd like. So you're just kind of journaling your experience through grief and giving it an outlet, right? That you want to talk about it. And if you don't want to journal it in that way, that's totally fine. It's one of the 5 ways of doing things, but journaling really helps you to really get the energy out of you. Otherwise, it just rolls around and rolls around and rolls around. And I do have clients that don't feel comfortable journaling because they've had histories of people confiscating their journals, reading their journals, using their journals against them. So that might feel not safe for you to journal. So in that way, you could use a voice note, or potentially you could put it into a computer if you like, but really just wanting you to get it out of you in some way. All right, number 4 is to speak about them, to talk about them. I think in society, we don't really feel comfortable with people who talk about the dead. Well, it's not me, y'all. You can talk about your dead people with me all the time. I love hearing stories about people who are on the other side, because that's your legacy, right? When they stop telling your stories, that is when you truly die. So I love legacy stories. I love hearing about people's grandparents and great grandparents and pets as well, right? Oh, I remember the time when, or I have this funny story where we had to jump into the lake to, whatever your stories are, find the right audience to tell them, and tell them, tell the stories of your pet, talk about them. It's really important to speak about them, right? And a picture of them can kind of go along with this too. It's not technically its own one, but I would say this is kind of like a bonus one, is having a picture made of them, like sort of blowing up your favorite picture of them, or having art commissioned around your pet. I've come across a few really beautiful sites that will commemorate your pet for you in really cute, beautiful ways with their name, in the picture. So Having a picture made of them is really beautiful to have in your home because there's somebody who carries love, for you. And then I'd say the fifth one is having a funeral for your pet. So oftentimes, especially after we grow up from being kids, we don't honor pets through funerals, which is, I feel like, an absolute travesty. Because at a funeral, you're allowed to come together, you're allowed to talk about things, you play music, you have um, the word I'm looking for is photos. Right, you have slideshows of them. You tell their stories. You come together as a family to mourn your loved one, but also to celebrate their memory. And I would say funerals are for the living. They're not for the dead, right? They're for us to move through the energy of grief together. And so having a funeral for your pet, especially if you have children in your household, and even if you don't, you can still bring together your family members and say, I'm going to have a funeral for my cat and I'd like you to come, and if you don't, you can have your therapist come. I literally had a client, I assigned it for homework to do a eulogy and have a funeral. And we did it online, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was such a beautiful, was dressed up for it. It's just a wonderful way to honor a beautiful animal that really left their imprint on your heart. So it's not silly. I think we start to think of it as silly because, oh, you're an adult now, you should move through it. Why not? Why not have a funeral for your pet? I think it's a beautiful way to move that energy and to really honor somebody who is so important in your life. And throughout all of these 5 ways, I'm going to invite you to have a lot of self compassion for yourself, even though people might not understand that about you or might not understand that because they might not have had a pet or they were told to get over it really quickly or no one was kind to them about their situation. You don't have to take that on as yours, right? I'm just going to really invite that in. You don't have to take it on as your own. And you will have people in your life that will be very sympathetic to it. As soon as I started talking about pet grief, you would be absolutely shocked, maybe not, because you might have this, of how many people said, I still mourn my cat who died 3 years ago. I never had a chance to really mourn my dog because life was just too busy. I had this beautiful horse and I cried so hard when the horse passed. And I wasn't allowed to do anything, see the pet. They just took the pet away. So there's a lot of grief still in those moments that are held there in those moments in time, right? You might be surprised to hear that. Even a pet grief can hold you in that moment of time and can prevent you from moving forward in your life in some way. So it's really interesting when we start to go on the path of grief and think, well, pet grief isn't as bad as losing your child. It can be. I mean, who's to say it's not? You don't get to judge somebody else's grief. This could be somebody's baby, like really, truly their baby, and the one thing they poured into everything in their life, right? Who's to say that, right? It is not for us to judge someone else's grief. Our only job is to support people in their grief at the pace they're ready to move forward. That's it, right? And as a counselor myself, with helping people who are moving through grief, there is such a thing as being kind of stuck in grief. And that requires a psychologist help because that's called complicated grief. We're really doubling down on this grief and we're holding it to give us something accountability, show that we really loved this thing, part of our identity. We don't, there's a number of reasons for complicated grief. And if that is the case for you or somebody in your life, then highly, highly recommend contacting a good therapist. The Grief and Trauma Healing Center in Edmonton is an amazing place to get support. And they also see clients online, and there's a number of hotlines as well, which we'll put in through the show notes as well. So if you are moving through pet grief, I just want to send you so much love. It is one of the hardest things to go through because they really are in our hearts and in many memories and part of our lives in such a deeply loving way that if you're experiencing that, I hear you. I see you. And as you incorporate and move that energy, through your body, through giving it a place to express, talking about this beautiful pet that you've had with the right audience, you will find that it'll just get a little bit easier, a little bit easier, a little bit easier, because you don't forget about them. It's not like it'll never affect you. You can still think about your dog, your childhood dog, many years from now and still get sad. But what happens is you grow around the grief, right? It just stays there. It stays there, but you're growing around it now versus it being taking up so much space as it does at the beginning of grief. So, wishing you space, ease, and self compassion as you navigate grief if you are navigating a pet's grief.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Story of Spirit podcast. I hope you have found inspiration, support, and practical insights to help you align with your soul-led purpose and live a life that sets your soul on fire. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us to reach more listeners and continues to provide valuable content. I sincerely appreciate every share, and I know it is how most people find me. It is because caring people like you have shared me with them at the right and perfect time. For more resources, insights, and to connect with our community, please visit us at www.sheetalstory.com and follow us on Instagram at sheetalstory. Remember, your journey to a more aligned and vibrant life is just the beginning, and I am here to support you every step of the way. Until next time, stay aligned, stay inspired, and keep shining your beautiful light. This is Sheetal Story, signing off from the Story of Spirit podcast. Here's the legalese that's required by our lawyers. This podcast and the YouTube channel represents the opinions of Sheetal Story and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical, psychological, or financial advice. This series is informational and entertainment purposes only. Because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional, your mental health dream team, your financial advisor, or anyone else that's an expert in the field in where you are thinking of making big choices in your life.